Hi, I'm Anthony.
Hey, I'm Marcel.
Today we're going to talk about how we created an agile movement in a complex global soft power giant. We're going to give you the ingredients for success, from sowing that first seed to creating happy employees delivering good quality software at pace.
And the gist really is what we want to kind of bring across is that transformation isn't done to people, it's done by people. And we'll go through that, kind of how we did that over the next couple of minutes.
Before we do that, just a bit of an introduction for myself. I've worked in digital agencies for over 10 years. And I needed a change. I was fed up dealing with really angry clients, creating websites for products I didn't believe in. And then I had a baby. I grew up. I wanted to do some good in the world and work on products that, were wholesome and good. And so I joined the public sector. I joined the British Council for a better life, really, for a more meaningful life and an easier life as head of project management in their digital team, doing some maternity cover. But for those of you who don't know who the British Council are, it's an organisation rooted in British colonial history that builds connections, understanding and trust between people in the UK and other countries through arts and culture, education and the English language. It was set up in the 30s during the Great Depression, where there was a sort of huge drop in international trade, massive falls in living standards and high and persistent unemployment. It was a time of growing threat to British values, prosperity and security, and the economic hardship led to extremist views. Nazism was on the rise. Across the world, other countries challenged Britain's place and influence in trade and diplomacy. So we needed an answer. The creation of the British Council in 1934 was one way the UK government reacted to the growing threat to British interests. And today we're still governed by the UK Foreign Office. But we've got this massive, great £500 million turnover exams business. We deliver a number of exams for a number of people, including the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. We deliver school exams in the UK and abroad, so such as GCSEs and A-levels internationally. And our biggest business is we're co-owner of IELTS. IELTS is the most successful global English assessment test in the world. If you want to work, study or migrate to a country where English is the native language, you more often than not have to have sat one of our exams. And it's sat by 3 million people globally every year. And what that does is effectively fund our core purpose, which is that we connect the best of the UK with the world and the best of the world with the UK, essentially making friends around the world, trying to build understanding between nations. And one example of this is Shakespeare's Lives, which was something we did in 2016 to celebrate 400 years since his death. And we did this by various initiatives, pairing UK and Korean poets and artists to develop new graphic sonnets, touring British films that have reimagined his work across the globe, funding and curating international dance interpretations. And another thing we did was working with Chinese artists to brand a metro train in Shanghai with his work. So that's just a bit about the British Council, but going back to what my task was, well, I was, head of project management. And so I was given this sort of first task, which was, dressed up as a simple bit of assurance on delivery of exams technology, that huge, great business that I talked about, easy. When I had a look, that was the sort of image that I saw in my head. It was this sort of dystopic organisation littered with failed attempts of change, half-finished implementations of new process, bits of Agile, bits of waterfall, bits of just get the stuff done, get it delivered type process, red tape across the organisation, shadow IT functions, and monolithic systems. And all of this was having an effect on the customer experience, affecting things like conversion and also increasing business overheads.
And I'm actually not sure why you were surprised, because after all, it's an 80-year-old public sector organization, right? And even to be honest, if we look in the private sector quite frequently, for those of you who've kind of been around the block, these things are not that uncommon, right?
Really? But I couldn't help myself, right? I'd come from a commercial digital agency background and come into this new job where I was going to do good in the world and I was going to, do arts festivals and all that sort of cultured stuff. But I just had to have a go at dealing with this delivery mess. I saw the organisation sort of really needed to fix this. And so as much as I dreamt about having this sort of easy life, it just wasn't going to happen. Before we go into detail, though, I'll just let Marcel introduce a bit more about himself.
Cool. So yeah, like Anthony, I've been around the block. I've worked in the digital space for 20 years for consultancies, brands and clients directly. And I dabble in product management, project management, business analysis, delivery management. And as part of this, I've seen the good, so the projects you're really excited about, the ones that make you get up in the morning, the ones you tell your friends about, and I've also seen the bad, the ones that are kind of, make it really hard to go to work every day, and sometimes afterwards you're like, why the fuck was I actually part of this project? And following from this, I have like 3 rules these days. I only work with nice people, and by nice I mean people you want to spend 8 hours a day with, or more. I only work with skilled people, or people who want to be skilled, because who wants to work with someone who's not interested in doing their job or getting better, or, changing? I also only want to work with sane people, and what I mean by sanity is, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but understanding the difference between vision and action, and vision and implementation. Because if you only talk in vision, you're kind of always in the clouds. Nothing ever really happens. I've got a 4th rule, which is around not touching ethically challenged products or projects. That's possibly part of a different talk. It's far more complicated, but it's worth considering as well. So moving on swiftly from that point. I want to get this out of the way. So everything we are telling you today is really about people. So the challenges we see when I as a consultant get into organizations, or Anthony who works for an organization, is rarely, although we're all in IT, is rarely about an algorithmic challenge or a software challenge. While software engineers have a difficult and hard job, I think that mostly the teams together, software engineers and other disciplines, really solve human messiness. So what does success look like for the both of us where we are in our career at the moment? Success really means for us sustainable progress. And it means doing things that make sense now in the moment, but the things you do also need to make sense down the line. So you don't want to kind of do things that basically drag disaster and scorched earth in their wake. You want to do things in ways that work now and also work in the long term. And for us, specifically talking about this project, it also meant helping an organization towards that sustainable change, having a lasting impact. So at the point where the story begins, really, I was working as a hired gun. I was working as a contractor with Sullivan and Stanley. It's a London-based consultancy focusing on agile change and transformation. And they came to me and they said, look, I've got this project, the project sponsor being Anthony here. He's a good guy, and he wants us to help British Council on their way towards agility. And because it kind of fits in with what I just described about success and what I want to achieve, I thought, well, let's see and let's get out to play. So that's kind of how, over a couple of flat whites, the 2 of us met. Anthony lives down the road, and we had a little bit of a chat what the project was about.
And so I sold him the grand vision: revolutionise exams technology in the British Council by developing a customer-centric, outcome-focused delivery organisation.
And my gut feel reaction initially was like, what the fuck? I mean, this is just one of those things that you will have seen this before. Some leaders, some C-level kind of gives the organisation that kind of blurb. And I'm like, okay, hang on. So while we kept on talking, I realised that A, Anthony is a nice guy. B, the ideas he had were the right ideas. I think he identified, or thought at the time, the problems sound realistic problems, and the way he was talking about solving the problem, it sounded really compelling. So the question then is that as a consultant, you're being brought in when things are fucked up, right? No one pays for consultants if things are going well. There's no point in this. So the question then is, if someone gives you a vision and a brief, how serious are they really about achieving what they're saying? Are they just interested in a plaster on something or a short-term fix to something that maybe they can then get on in their career? Or are they really interested in actually that lasting change? And as we kept on talking, I thought, well, actually, the way Anthony talks about this project, that's really interesting and that sounds credible. So let's give this a try, shall we? So what then happened was that subsequently Anthony and my team at Sullivan and Stanley turned his vision into actionable strategy. So we basically focused around this idea of affecting change by example, and we'll explain in a minute what that means, and by osmosis. Specifically, what we said was we would build on the groundwork that Anthony, and he'll talk about this in a minute in detail, had done in the company to set this entire initiative up. We'd build a skilled team. We would give that team clear goals in terms of delivering value to the organization on one hand and delivering change on the other, so in conjunction. We'd enable the team, or have people enable and empower the team as they went along, then really let them get on with the delivery of value and the change. As this happened, we would communicate the good stuff the team was doing, promote and demonstrate the change to the wider organization, so that ultimately we could transfer all the good stuff they had done out of that team into the wider organization. That's where the osmosis part comes in.
I mean, ultimately, this is about creating the tipping point whereby the change becomes the new normal. But before I wrote my vision, just to sort of step back a bit, I had to do the groundwork. I had to define the problem. There was a lot of different theories as to why, delivery wasn't particularly brilliant within the British Council when it came to technology, but not a consistent theory. So I had to define what the real problem was. It was organisational. Surprise, surprise, it wasn't technical. And, and my definition was that, we had an overly complex delivery structure, lack of accountability, coupled with shed loads of bureaucracy. So once I sort of defined that, I then aligned people, change agents, I suppose, across the organisation to build a network of like-minded folk, to find those people in the organisation, not only so that I started to create a narrative that was consistent, but also so that I had people later on, when I actually came to delivering a change in the organisation, who shared my vision and could help me. The next thing I had to do was get permission. At this point, I was on a maternity cover gig as a head of project management, and I needed permission to transcend all of the existing organisational processes and policies within the organisation, to break the rules. But that wasn't just for myself, but it was also so I could empower a team to break those rules, so I could let a team, make hay. And I was lucky. I was really lucky. I worked for an organisation that was supportive and actually positive about what I was trying to do, that wanted to change and liked my idea, who offered me the opportunity to do this and the space to fix it. And finally, I needed a strategy. And ultimately, the strategy was about initially just showing good, breaking that spell of cynicism across the organisation that had built up over years and years and years, that we couldn't deliver good software. So to create that movement, to start moving people in that direction, we needed to show people what good looks like. And we needed to form a team, or I needed to form a team. So I, having talked about building that network of people that I who had the same views as me, who wanted to change the organisation, through that network I knew people in the organisation who would work well together in a team. Engineers, good developer, good QA people, good designers, etc. But I also recognised the fact that I needed help. We had really good people, but there was a reason that we weren't particularly brilliant at delivery. So I brought in solid and proven agile delivery skills. I brought in experts with a new perspective, technologists and delivery leads who could deal with the business, who knew how to talk to the business, who had experience in talking to the business. People who had the ability to challenge the status quo. A lot of people in our organisation didn't want to challenge the status quo. They tried before, it hadn't worked. And so by bringing in people who would just challenge it again and showing how you challenge the status quo, that was also very useful. And finally, I brought in people who had an attitude of shoot first. Don't ask for forgiveness later. Don't wait before you make the decision. And challenge is good.
So that's how on a Monday, I found myself with two other consultants, part of a wider team that Anthony had set up, working for British Council. And I should say that the two other consultants, a delivery lead and a tech lead, were like myself, kind of people who had been around the block. They had seen different organizations. They had done change before. So we were quite experienced in that area, also quite heavy on soft skills, but also practitioners. So, hands-on people delivering product like myself, or helping teams, facilitate teams delivering products, and, as a tech lead, being a hands-on software engineer. The team was made up of, as I said, the three of us, and then 7 colleagues. for software engineers and DevOps, quality assurance, user experience, and a junior product owner. And of course, this team will have to interface with the wider business. So hence, as you can see, interfacing with users and stakeholders, they give you their needs, their requirements, their expectations. You have interfaces into leadership and management who provide guidance, goals, support, facilitation. We'll talk about this in a minute in a bit more detail. And then also subject matter experts. So this is where your InfoSec guys come in, or your exams director or assessment experts. And we were working with all of these. But the center, so the 10-people team, that's your engine of change, really.
So to affect the change, I had to give the team a really clear and simple business problem, but also one that was quite high profile, because I wanted people across the organisation to see what we were doing. I wanted us to be very visible. So the outcome that I set the team was to improve the booking journey for our English test, for our IELTS test, which at this point had far too many steps. There was at least sort of 16 to 20 clicks if you really knew what you were doing. And that's before you actually booked and paid. There were more form fields than you can ever imagine. There were bespoke components. We reinvented the date picker. It was over-localized. It was built on a monolith. And releases were really infrequent. Like we were releasing, I don't know, once every few months if we were lucky. And there was no learning coming out of anything we changed. So basically a bad user experience which impeded conversion, bad processes which impeded learnings, and the business ability to react to change. So having set the foundations and strategy to deliver against that vision, I had that terrifying moment when you're like, shit, I've got the team in place, and now we actually have to deliver. I've got all of these, but I've made it really visible. And it was terrifying. So Marcel, how did we do it? So
most of the teams I work with kick off work streams with what I call an inception. And the reason we did this was that Anthony had done very deliberate groundwork to set us up, and we felt we needed also to kick this work stream up off very deliberately. So an inception is basically a time-bound activity. In this case, it was 2 weeks. We thought 2 weeks is appropriate because it was a new team, people who had never been working for the organization, people who had never met, to work together collaboratively, bring some other stakeholders into this team, and over 2 weeks, align on the goals and success criteria for what we wanted to achieve, gather as much context as we could regarding the product, the business, technology, infrastructure, stakeholders, everything you needed to know to make this a success, define at a high level the future shape of this. What should this be in the future and how should it look like? And then also define how we wanted to go as a team about delivering this change. Now, don't confuse this with waterfall. I'm not talking about big design upfront specification. This is at a much higher level, and it is 2 weeks because there was a lot of new stuff for this team. If you had an experienced team that was in the organization already, you could maybe do something like this in a day or two. So it could be much shorter. But this initial activity where you bring a team together, you let them align, build context, agree on goals, build relationships, that is super, super important. I've seen this so many times where this doesn't get done properly. You'll just incur the cost later down the line.
And once completed, in fact, throughout this process, we were making it highly visible. We wanted the organisation to see everything that we were doing. So that was really important, so that it could become a pattern as well for the organisation later on.
In terms of actually delivering, we decided to go for an iterative pattern, as I said, including product and change. And we decided on 3 months, 90-day time boxes. And in each of these time boxes, we would deliver part of people culture change, process technology change, and delivering value to the business. So all these things coming together. So change can really only come, I believe, from those doing the work. So the people doing the work at the grassroots level, I was about to say bottom, but I don't mean this in a bad way, at the shop floor. They know what works and what won't. They're closest to the customer, closest to the problem. They suffer any good or bad decisions they make, but as they make them, they can also affect change and pivot into the right direction. So it has to come from the bottom up and inside out, rather than someone doing, as we used to do it in the 80s, big business re-engineering kind of mandated from the top. It doesn't work. What does that mean in practice? So there's no magic. We chose a box standard Scrum framework to set the team up because we know it kind of works. And yes, it needs fine-tuning, and you may lose a couple of ceremonies, or you may adapt things, but that's fine. This we did over time, but we started with Scrum. We worked really, really hard to form a team. So initially, this was kind of during COVID times, so it was all remote. We had 3 stand-ups, one in the morning, proper stand-up, one around lunchtime, just to do a little bit of talking, building relationships, talking about anything really, not necessarily work, and then one at the evening to just review the day and learn from that. We identified friendly stakeholders, built really close relationships with them, including them in the process. And the trick here is to build trust. And you build trust by telling them what you're doing next, then actually delivering on this, building functionality, building value for the business, and then kind of iterating on top of that. We focused heavily on collaboration. So in our case, we used Miro to quite excessively co-create and exchange ideas. Us as externals, and I think Anthony has alluded to this earlier, we were in a position that we could push change harder than maybe someone internally could have. Someone internal might have been worried about offending some manager or, putting a stop on their career path by saying things that can't be said. Whereas we didn't really care. I mean, that was part of our job, really. So as an example, we knew we wanted to work towards continuous integration, continuous delivery. There were certain changes that we all agreed were good to make, but the team either had tried them before or, didn't believe that management would go along with it. And we could say, look, we'll take responsibility for this. Just do it. If it goes wrong, we'll take the hit for that. And that enabled the team to go along with some of those changes. And then, of course, leading by example, right? As I said before, talking at people is all fine, and you can coach and you can mentor, but ultimately, really, you need to do the job and show people how it's done on the ground floor by working with people. So there was a lot of pairing involved.
But, I mean, all this good transformational stuff, it only work if you empower a team, if the team are allowed to make these changes and enabled to affect change. Teams need to be allowed to uproot things and take risks. And my view on this is, top-down still is really important. For me, why keep a dog and bark yourself, right? Why would I employ engineers and designers and good digital experts and then interfere in what they do? They're the experts. Doesn't mean, though, top-down is redundant. I saw my role very much to just empower people, to clear things out of the way and sell their work. I can't reiterate that enough. Selling the work is really, really important when you're trying to change the organisation. You want everybody to see the success and the process that you're doing, you're using. And I think we had some success. We had 100 people in August come to one of the show and tells, and that's a bit of a record, really, for 100 people to actually bother to sign into one of these things in August, when half of government and half of the public sector go on holiday.
Let's just stick with CI/CD for a moment here. As part of the process, the existing process of deploying to production, there were certain stage gates and quality assurance procedures and kind of signatures you had to get to deploy to production, which made this a really painful process. Now, if we wanted to change that process, we would have to go through a really heavyweight change framework. And that wouldn't have been possible, certainly not in the time, possibly never. So again, by having the kind of empowerment from Anthony, who had done, as he said, some kind of groundwork and legwork around us, we were just enabled to kind of do the change without asking for permission, really. And that allowed us to act much faster and make that change more radically than otherwise we would have been able to.
And I could do that because I had the permission through an organisation that had given me the freedom and permission. I could get behind the product owner and the team to enforce a value-based product strategy.
Cool. So, about those iterations we spoke about, we just want to talk a little bit more like how did that look actually in practice. So when we started, what we found was this booking journey, Anthony mentioned earlier, being very messy, badly designed, too long, not user-friendly. And we also found that the processes and the infrastructure, that journey was kind of sitting on top, were disjointed, inefficient, ineffective. So we kicked off one of the first iteration, 90 days, and we focused on forming and storming with the team, learning about the organization and the product, really understanding what we're dealing with. We also started to get into the movement, into the rhythm of change, by specifically identifying quick wins in their journey. So where we're looking at the beginning of the product selection, until the point where you throw the product into the basket. And we just redeveloped, redesigned some of the components, like the date picker Anthony mentioned, that were just badly designed, and we just cut some of the stages and steps out that weren't needed. In terms of the foundations and the scaffolding for infrastructure and process, we focused on, as I said, Scrum as a proven framework and optimized that. But we also started to look at continuous integration, continuous delivery, working towards that pattern. So we started to look at how code was, how code builds were done, how integration was conducted, and just started to optimize around the edges here. We had, I should say, that this wasn't easy. Even within our team, like the 10-people team, let alone the wider stakeholders, there was a lot of cynicism. Change had been tried before, nothing had come of it. And people were like, well, there's, even more consultants, yet another manager with big words. And yeah, we've all seen this before.
But it's about building a movement, right? You don't want to boil the ocean. You want to affect change iteratively, step by step, baby steps, whilst you build trust within the organisation.
So come iteration 2, another 90 days, we focus on evolving the product and making key enhancements. So here we tackle the overall journey, so we're branching out. We solidified the ways of working, optimizing the process, just cutting more and more bureaucracy out of the process, leaving things behind that didn't work. So at some point we stopped estimating because the team was just working well, and we're like, no need to do that. We evolved our infrastructure, pushing for test and infrastructure automation, making things more repeatable and faster. And we also pressed for a cultural shift. So we forced the team and the stakeholders to be leaner, to prioritize harder, prioritize more regularly, build that kind of mid-term to long-term, very top-level roadmap, and work with us very, very closely on the things that were coming like tomorrow and the day after.
And iteration 2 was, I think, where I really had my proud moment, where the team really started to gel, and that meant a huge amount to me. They were delivering like clockwork. It was also where we felt we were starting to make change that actually could be sustainable within the organisation.
And then, for us, finally, iteration 3, as Anthony just said, we didn't really have to worry about the team. We had bi-weekly deployments at that point. Not perfect, but, pretty good. And we had far more engaged and happy stakeholders. So we kept an eye on not losing any of the good stuff, but we didn't worry too much about how the team was working because that was going well. But more importantly, we started to push change outwards. So we introduced new patterns. We worked with the team to integrate booking cancellations and refunds, and introduced, while we did that team to, for them, new agile ways of working. And at some point they realized that the ways they had been working before, very, very waterfall, just wasn't that great. And they were like, it would be nice if we had a little bit of what you guys are doing. We also built a microservice that would connect applications throughout the organization, basically connecting these applications through a single customer record and identifying unique users. And while this was driven technically, as you said, there was loads of monolithic kind of applications in the organization, and this was a new pattern. It also started to cross-pollinate ideas and ways of working towards other teams who would then integrate with that microservice. So we did 3 iterations, and this was purely for organizational constraints, and we affected change as part of that, but make no mistake, change isn't necessarily fast. 9 months is great, but I've seen change in some organizations take much, much longer, so it depends on the organization.
Yeah, you really shouldn't expect transformation to be, a single time box thing that's done. It's actually a continuous process.
So how do we know we've been successful? So I personally think bi-weekly releases, and therefore the ability to respond to change and requests much faster, that's kind of, for me, good enough. I don't need much more for this type of project.
And we had really loads of positive stakeholder feedback. Our biggest market, who were notoriously difficult to work with, wanted to get involved, and that was after that first iteration.
I can do one better possibly. So funnily, after the third iteration, the delivery lead and I found ourselves working with another organization, very different industry, private sector, but we had very much the same brief, help us with agility. They had loads of projects and initiatives that were going on, big deadlines looming, and they couldn't deliver. And they said, we need to be more agile. And we really struggled in the first 3 months. So with literally a very, very similar team, we got a lot of like little plasters delivered, and the clients were happy, but we didn't feel confident that we had actually delivered anything lasting. And then over time, as we started to talk to leadership and people like Anthony in that organization, said, guys, you need to provide that air cover. You need to align the organization. You need to make clear to the organization that this is the way to go, not just let a team be alone on their own at the grassroots level. Then things started to change. So I think that was, for me, that was a really good kind of a comparison.
For me, the biggest mark of success was our initially sceptical product owner's view on the world. So we asked him last night over a gin and tonic.
So I've been able to get back to people within a few days to say, yeah, the requirement you asked for, that thing that you asked us to do, we've actually done it. They almost literally can't believe that we've done it like that quickly and actually got something out there that's fixed their problem.
So how do you scale this? Well, it's about rinse and repeat. Go through a number of those 3-month iterations until you got to a point where you've got like quite a solid team, one that can run with very little input. By then, the business should be on board. You should start to have a consensus around the approach. Over time, choose more complex problems to solve. Don't go for that initiative that's failed a million times. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but there might be a reason why that's failed. Spread out across the organisation. So start to cross-pollinate across the organisation by taking team members from that original team and putting them in new teams and starting to spread some of that experience. And in a nutshell, how do you do it? Well, you prepare the ground. I can't tell you how important that was. But the ground will be different in terms of your context. But ultimately, you need to find those levers in the organisation that allows you to create a compelling narrative around why change is important. I was lucky. The narrative was actually waiting to be found within the British Council. And then form the small team and give them a really straightforward but clear goal that's very visible. Empower them. You've got to empower the team. You've got to let them make decisions. Make them highly visible, as I've said. And then once they're stable, sort of scale them through this idea of osmosis. And ultimately, if you keep doing that, you'll create your tipping point.
Just to share, finally, a couple of principles that we followed. Have a focused team and give them clear goals and a shared view on what problem to tackle and how to tackle the problem. And reiterate that and make sure that everyone is aligned as you proceed over time. Collaborate and build relationships. That's possibly, for me, coming back to the point, it's all about people, the most important thing. Define your ways of working and optimize them as you go. Don't boil the ocean, keep it simple. So, build on success, keep what works, change or throw away what doesn't, and iterate and evolve. Never go for the radical overall change. Go in baby steps and have incremental change that builds on top. Take your time. You cannot rush change. It just sometimes takes time. I think sometimes management and leadership get this idea sold that you can change an entire organization in 6 months if you throw 5,000 Agile consultants at them or Agile coaches. It doesn't work in my experience. It's a waste of time and money. Also be brave. Don't shy away from the fights you need to have, and especially the fights you can actually win. And those you can't win or people you offend, well, so be it. Some you can win back later, and some you can't, and maybe, that's also fine. And finally, lead by example. So just don't, it's funny that I say this because we are talking at you right now, but don't just talk at your colleagues. Really do the change as you work with them.
So the movement's still going strong. I no longer have that dystopian image in my head when I think about delivery in the British Council. And that was started a year ago. It was the first attempt, and we're still going. We're still sort of working towards transformation.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Any questions?
How quickly did you get to bi-weekly releases from the start?
It was quite quick, wasn't it?
It was relatively quick. I'm just thinking this is now a bit ago, quite some time ago. I would say maybe 2/3 through the first time box.
Yeah.
Something like that.
2 months in.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it wasn't too. The landscape wasn't too bad in that respect. But we had also good people who were just kind of able to make that change quite quickly.
We had a few nervous people though when we wanted
Yes.
to do it. Like I had to knock on a few doors and say we need to just make this happen. But yeah, it was quite quick.
What is the age range within the team?
Mixture of ages, I think.
So
I don't want to. Like probably from about 40 down to.
So I mean, I'm definitely over 40. So
Oh, I was being kind.
so like from definitely mid 40s, maybe half of the team, I would say.
Yeah.
And then the other half was the Polish chaps,
Sort of
late 20s.
late 20s, early 30s.
So it's a good mix actually of people. Because yeah, I know age can be a factor in this in some cases, but I think again it's how you. So the chap we just saw, the product owner. I mean, he's like what 40-ish.
Yeah,
Richard?
45, 50.
And I wasn't sure about his. Was he up for change? But I think sometimes age isn't actually the factor in it; it's people. And age doesn't really matter that much.
How did you deal with this approach of working systems over comprehensive documentation for a government organization?
Interesting. So we didn't do any documentation really, except that we had code that was well written and kind of self-documenting, if you like. Parts of the organization had big GR tickets, Confluence pages explaining everything, but that stuff is outdated the moment it's written, right? So funnily, we weren't really asked for that, but I think this was also, again, that we were able to deploy without having any external QA or any external oversight in this. The only time when we needed to do documentation was when we were making massive changes to the architecture that would affect other teams, and then we just had to present with a little bit of documentation. I think we also did an InfoSec assessment with documentation that we just followed the existing process because we didn't feel it was just the time yet to make that change. So I think it's fighting the battles where you can, making the change where you can, and then just maybe going away from this idea that documentation in paper form is actually that helpful. But that needs a little bit of mindset change.
Typically, our organisation's full of Sorry?
The government took it.
Yeah, I mean, that probably was partly because of my position, and I was able to just sort of say, don't worry about it, and had the permission to do that. But, typically our organisation document the hell out of everything and no one reads it. And, and no one's asked for any documentation since, Marcel was working with me, so.
Sometimes I think they do it just because they do it, and if you don't do it, no one's actually missing anything.
Well, I also think because the code quality was so great, it hasn't fallen over, it's had no problems, whereas a lot of the other technology we deploy does have a lot of problems, and so people then want to revert back to the documentation.
Yeah. It's funny because until you said it, it didn't even occur to me that we didn't do that.
Yeah.
But it's a good point. All right. Any other questions? I mean, we're around, so shall we leave it here?
Thank you.
Thank you guys for showing up, especially at the
Tail end of the day, the graveyard slot, as we call it.
Thank you so much.